Here now we have former Detective Inspector Lance Burdett joining us on the program. Welcome, Lance. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
Blake, it's an absolute pleasure to speak with you, mate. Thanks so much for connecting.
Let's start closer to home. So, last week our government announced new citizens arrest laws that they are hoping to bring into legislation. What are your thoughts on that as a former detective inspector and involved in the police force?
Yeah, it's so the thing that I worry about is excessive use of force from anyone, right? Even from police. So the police aren't able to go around themselves and just detain, arrest anyone. You know, if you walked away from a police officer, you can walk away. It's when they detain you, then they have to give Bill of Rights. So, and then the use of force, everyone is held accountable. So, what we have at the moment is a situation where Section 48 enables people to defend themselves or another person. And if you use force, it has to be appropriate. So, that's where we start. That's where I start with. And there's even been police officers who have been charged with using excessive force. And so, if we take that into the public uh, environment where every situation we are likely to be triggered for some reason, and if we are detaining people, the chances are that that person who we're trying to detain is going to get angry or violent. Um, I can see it working in the security industry, provided they're trained. There's a lot of risk when you detain people. Essentially the ultimate, you could kill people. If you get them in a stranglehold and block their airways, then you're in trouble. So I worry for both people, the person who's doing the detaining and the detainee, that excessive force will be used. So there has to be some really big legislation around that and what you can and can't do.
For me, I kind of in two minds about it. For general, for some situations, I don't like it. But as a disability advocate for people that are disabled and can't defend themselves, for their caregivers to be able to do um, tackles and stuff, should they try and hurt a disabled person, I like it from that point of view. Now, I don't agree with
Yeah.
this government on a lot of stuff, but I quite like it from that perspective. Um,
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Blake. Now, so that goes to Section 48. That's in law now. So Section 48 of the Crimes Act says that you are any person that's able to use force to protect um, yourself or anyone else. But the second part of that is that's what people miss out is any force used uh, during the assistance has to be reasonable in the circumstances. And then the next part is you will be held to account for excessive force. So we already have a lot of this. Now, we have to do something with people walking out of shops with trolleys full of food, right? So I think that's where they're aiming this at. And for shopkeepers, dairy owners and shop owners, where people come in and they smash the place up, you can't touch me, and they walk away. There has to be something for that. Absolutely. However, I see overseas, I watch a lot of videos for the work that I do, and shop owners with baseball bats coming out swinging. Uh, it's just I can see it getting out of hand because legislation and repercussions doesn't work at the time when you are in the heat of the moment. I work in neuroscience, how the brain works. So when the amygdala sparks up, we're taken back to a memory of something similar. Our brain is wired fight or flee. So we fight and we use fight so that it completely overcomes the what we think is the risk. Now, in the heat of the moment, Blake, that can just turn quite messy. So I'm concerned that it should be only be able to be used by professionals such as security guards. Absolutely, I'm in favour of it. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here, and I'm going to just hold you until police come. I think that's a great move.
Yeah, it's a very divisive topic. So it's nice to be able to have a discussion like this, because I've spoken to a few organisations in the disability sector that says they are under the current law. They have been told they are still restricted to the very confusing, weird timing rules that we have at the moment.
Yeah.
So they are very keen on this new legislation, and for they said for them it's not about right and left, National Labour, Greens, whatever. They said this is just a good policy for our vulnerable people because it will.
Yeah. I agree. It's needed. It needs. I didn't even know that law was there. The one that after 9 at night you're allowed to do something, and in the daytime it has to be over. I didn't even realise all of that stuff was there because being a police officer, it's superfluous, And look, I'm going to be honest. Um, Sometimes you walk to a situation as a police officer and you think, I know they've done something wrong, but I'm not sure what it is. And so you go back and you go through the books and you think, well, you go to the boss and say, they did this. What do you reckon? Oh, that fits here somewhere. So that's law. It's so complicated in situations. So I would hate for this to be rolled out too soon as a knee jerk reaction. So we need to take some time. But I'm with again, it's not left, right, whatever. I'm agreeing that something must be done. It is completely inappropriate that people can walk into a shop and steal. Let's call it what it is. It's stealing. Steal and not be held to account. That has to change.
Yeah, so my final comment on this would it has to be done right, good and done right. Anything to add, Paul?
Well, I've got a number of questions around this actually. How do you judge what's excessive? Because I'm
So
guessing
that's
police get training for
yeah.
this.
Oh, great question. So it's judged in a court by peers or a judge, right? So that is judged now in a situation where there's calm, and it's called the reasonableness test. Would a reasonable person have used that reasonable first force within that reasonable situation? Well, it's not reasonable in a court where you have people, say, let's just say judges, for example, who see a lot of this stuff, and eventually you start to see so much of it that you sort of get accustomed, acclimatized to that sort of thing, and that's why they use case law a lot. So they take out the personal bias because of that type of tendency. But it's done in a situation where people will judge you who weren't there, weren't in your situation at the time, and so it's an unreasonable test, in my humble opinion, because we should be allowed to use some force. I'm agreeing with that. If somebody breaks into your house, you should be allowed to, if they're coming through the window, hit them on the head with something. But that causes risk and harm. But it's my house. So you can see there's this two things. So the reasonable test is decided in a court post event, and it doesn't always capture the heat of the moment. And again, I go back to that. If we allow a legislation where people can use a citizen's arrest, which is not the right term, the ability to detain people until police arrive, the rules have to be really descriptive.
Which sort of brings me to the next question, which is you see people like Brian Tamaki really excited about this. He has a history of getting people worked up, and we saw a couple of weeks ago some of his followers take that to the extreme out in Te Atatu. Is that how big a concern is that for, say, the police themselves or for people who work in security that you've got vigilantism being promoted by somebody like this?
I think yeah, looking at Brian Tamaki and his work, I mean, he does great work within the church, and you can argue, but he does. There's people there that he looks after. I worry about an organisation like that, though. So I've got a master's in terrorism and safety and security. I just leave that bit off the end because terrorism sounds better. And so it's groups like that become radicalized. There's always extremist parts to those groups. So people that sit on the fringes will misinterpret perhaps what Brian might be meaning. Although some of his rhetoric that's come out recently, I think I'm fearful of. And again, I look at what they wear. So the man up, and they've got the leather jacket with the patches and I mean, if you look from a distance, you couldn't tell them apart from a gang. So that particular group, I wouldn't, I'd be concerned about if they were applauding it, as I would if it was, any other group, perhaps it was the local gun club think, yeah, this is great. Well, why? What's behind that? What's behind you supporting it? Me, I'm supporting the shop owners. I'm supporting us in our house. We should be allowed, if somebody's doing something outside our house and smashed a bottle against the window, we should be able to hold that person until police arrive. So that's where I come from on that. But yeah, I worry when organisations that have some elements that they can't control start praising it.
Do you agree with? Sorry. Do you agree with Phil Twyford that they should be a part of the gang legislation?
Oh, yeah, it's a fine line, isn't it? It's a fine line when you have uh, groups. Now, let me take it away from them and put it into another group of people. There's something called the Blue Knights. The Blue Knights are police, current and former, who ride motorcycles, and they have jackets, and they have president, and they have the rockers, and they have. Um, so the definition of it must be organized criminal gang. So that's what I take it back to. Is Brian Tamaki, for example, is it an organized criminal gang? No. So that's the part of the legislation that people don't read through. So the gang must be an organized criminal gang, or they call them OCMGs, organized criminal motorcycle gang. So that's the part that we've got to read into that. That's why I go back and I'm hesitant about saying that they are a gang. It's for whatever, a church, it's an assembly, it's whatever they're there for. And the same with the Blue Knights. They're not an organised criminal motorcycle gang. They've got patches, but that's to identify. There's a group that's out there, Christian Riders. They're another one, right? Christian Riders look the same, but they're not coming out with the rhetoric that's been coming out lately. Plus, they're not an organised. So that's where the law says it has to be. Not only does it has to be a described gang. So therefore, they've been described as organised criminal motorcycle gang or organised criminal gang. So yeah, that's the difference. So I don't agree with Phil.
But surely we can't have a organization holding people hostage in a library.
No, absolutely, and it doesn't matter who the group of people are, right? They're easily identifiable. If it had been just, if they hadn't worn their T-shirts, you wouldn't know who they were. You'd just think it was a group of Te Aratu. Incidentally, I lived there, and I know exactly the library, etc. And I used to live there for years. Um, if they hadn't had that, you wouldn't know who they were. Regardless of all of that, no one has the right to do what happened there. It was a sanctioned event. If you don't agree with it, you can protest peacefully. We all have the right to protest peacefully, and then we must leave. If you do not leave when you're asked to leave, and that's a facility where they could have it's a public facility, but run by the council. The council could have said, you leave, you trespass straight after that. So therefore, they could have been arrested for trespass. And that's a decision that had to be made by the people at the time. And would it inflame the situation or de-escalate it? So yeah, it's there's organisation. It's a time in our humanity where we are all stretched in one way or another. Violence has escalated 35% globally in countries where lockdown was used, and I can throw research at you on that, Blake. So we do have to be careful when we're starting to to bring legislation in, and we're starting to talk about separating groups out from each other. It's about taking a holistic view at the moment and taking it very slowly because of that behaviour that's coming out, a global phenomenon.
So if adding them to the legislation is not the answer, how do we deal with destiny shirts then?
Exactly how we would with everybody else. You break the law, you're held to account. There must be consequences. Now, increasing penalties doesn't stop it because it's the heat of the moment, right? So I always take the worst case example. So we look at Texas, where if you kill someone, it's a death penalty, right? In certain circumstances, it hasn't stopped murders, has it? No. So we don't think about consequences in the heat of the moment. You don't, when you think, oh, I'm going to, go into that library and we're going to disrupt what's going on. We don't think about, well, hang on a minute. What happens if somebody gets hurt? What happens if we don't think about that because we're not in we're in our limbic system where the amygdala sits and we're just in that fight or flight mode. So there's no rational thought there. So it's about having that rational thought. So yeah, we treat everybody the same unless they are being described in legislation as particularly different.
Kind of curious about that radicalisation stuff that you mentioned, because obviously that's kind of a scary thought that there are people out there being radicalised. We have seen the worst case scenario in this country of what happens when somebody becomes extremely radicalised. And you mentioned that there was a 35% increase there for those countries in lockdown. We were
In
starting to
violence,
see,
yeah.
yeah. Is that something that we should be concerned about as the public, that there seems to be an increase in radicalisation, or at least an increase in media coverage of people who
Yeah.
seem to be going that way, like Richard Seville, I think it is, the one who's been done for espionage. Was he the
Yep.
espionage one? Yeah, so there's a couple of those sort of fringe characters out there. How much of a concern should that be for the public?
I think it's a concern, a big concern, because it hides within homes. Now, when I did my master's 15 years ago, just 15 years ago, to become fully radicalized, in other words, I want to kill people. That's what radicalization is, right? I want to kill people. You had to meet people. So it was things like mosques, universities, gyms, places where people congregated. When we feel isolated and alone to the rest of the world, we look for like-minded people because we're a social species. So we're drawn into that, right? So we would go there and we would talk with some people. They would be able to manipulate us, and we became radicalized. But we had to meet people. Today we can become radicalized by watching videos. Our brains have changed. Now we're doing a podcast here. I can connect with you. I can now have the ability to see your facial expressions, which we never used to. It felt like I wasn't in the room with you. For me, I don't know about you, but it feels like I am. It feels like I'm with you, both of you right now. And so that's how our brain has changed. Now, so therefore, it lurks in the dark. We have got to be careful of what people are watching, and that's why we need a bit more, I think, surveillance on these real extremist websites, and start taking some websites down to start. It sounds like government monitoring, I know, but there's a huge risk at the moment. We are more open today as a society than ever before. Every time we are on our devices, we are getting dopamine, and dopamine rewires our brain. It is addictive. And what the reason for the addiction is, dopamine's the only neurochemical, that neurotransmitter that we learn from. That's the only one. So we get excited when we learn things. So when we're watching videos, we're getting excited about them and we're learning about what someone's saying. The first thing you ever read or get told, and when you're excited, is stuck in your head forever. It's called an anchoring bias. So this is how it works. If a dog could speak and say one word, what would that word be? Most people think either woof, and I've never heard a dog say woof, or they'll think walk or food. the two things you get told when you first got a dog. So it's called an anchoring bias. So when people are isolated and alone, are fragile, brittle, which we're in at the moment, we see something that resonates, and that there plants the seed to become radicalized. Now, most people will withdraw from that. Most people will see the rational part and they'll go, no. But if we are susceptible in any way from our personal lives and we feel aggrieved or whatever that might be, then we are drawn into it and we start looking and searching and we start to, oh, yeah, that's me. So you see, that happened during 2020 vaccinations. I don't use that term lightly. So it divided countries. It divided families, and it depended on your take and what you read and did at the first time you first read something. So we do have to be careful with our communication these days. We do have to be a little bit more wary and think wider and know that our brains have changed.
How does that then impact free speech? Because you get an organisation like the Free Speech Union, who are very big advocates of every speech should be out there so people can make their own decision. How do you balance that with, there is going to be radicalisation of some people because that's just how some people are wired and their
And
minds.
that's again a great point. That comes back to legislation again. I mean, it's you have to have somebody watching you, right? But otherwise, there'd be chaos in the world, right? Let's start there. There has to be police. There has to be governments. There has to be, but otherwise, the world would be in chaos. And so, yes, we have to. Free speech is great, provided it doesn't hurt. If you're saying things that hurt others, so I look at rainbow communities. I look at if people, if we go back just 10 years, a decade, people weren't able to be themselves. And so the only way that the world's going to develop and grow and mature is to be able to be ourselves, to be able to say, this is who I am and I'm proud. And then when you get other people going, no, what's their right to say that? Because that's who I am. Right now, so um, I guess I could take it to another form. So I'm neurodiverse. I have ADHD. Hence the hands go everywhere, and you will see I wander off, and I can't simply say no or yes to an answer. I have to justify and that's why this is going to be a long podcast. But there was a time when people with ADHD I was punished in school. Right. So I'm really comfortable when I travel of being alone. My wife says to me, "Are you ever lonely?" I said, "No, I'm alone, but never lonely because I'm used to being alone." So that's how we dealt with it. Now we understand it. So if back in my day, if they said ADHD, you're possessed, you need drugs to control your brain. We're going to do an exorcism on you. I'm thinking extreme here, but this is and then a group starts up and says everyone with ADHD has to be put in a special place because, right? So this is free speech. And so free speech comes from when we're challenged about our own ideas. That's where free speech comes from. And free speech, that like rhetoric around that is usually justified by people who have something to say against a particular group. So I could say it's a form of radicalization, couldn't I?
Yeah, it certainly sounds
Because it's
it.
what we believe. It's what I believe, and it's my right to say it. Well, it's not if it hurts people. It's not if it causes other people to become radical. It's not if it's against legislation. So, yeah, free speech is not free. Free
Were
speech is
you
only
surprised
free if it's
then
monitored.
when the previous government were doing the legislation work on hate speech, and it got a lot of pushback because of hate speech versus free speech? Were you surprised by that outcome, or
I was.
how did you feel
I was
about that?
surprised by a number of things that go. I was actually surprised around the cannabis debate, how close it was. I didn't think we were that way. And I was on the pro side, believe it or not. I'd say I was, and for various reasons, because if it's monitored and controlled, I've seen it so I work in the areas of people's brain, and I've seen it help people and save their lives and being able to open up new neural pathways. So if it's done right, I'm in favour of it. Right, I'm just not in favour of just everyone can smoke whenever they want to. So, but that free speech and hate speech. Again, it's a bit like we're talking about now, bringing it back to the right for people to detain others, the citizen's arrest. We have to be clear on what we want and how we do it. And so, yes, hate speech is exactly that, and it causes. Well, it can cause ultimately people to take their lives. It's really hate speech is horrible, right? And I hear it robust. In fact, I heard it called the other day the talk with Zelensky and as being and the president as robust discussion. No, it's not. That's not a robust discussion. That's been hateful towards the person. He's saying to him, "You've got no cards to play." And poor old Zelensky's saying, "It's not a game of cards. There's people dying." So you see what I'm saying? Yeah, we shouldn't be allowed to go and outwardly show hatred towards another group of people. We can oppose it without being hateful, can't we? Yep. And so, they could go along and just do process and say, "Oh, we're just not agreeing with them." Well, that's fine. But not when you start changing the things and when you start bringing violence into it and when you start, that's not who we should be.
And sort of the last question I've got on this topic for you, which is sort of veers a little bit. You did a little bit of work with prime ministerial security
I
and
did.
and organising that kind of stuff. How do you? Well, I'm guessing when you get an increase in the sort of behaviours that we're seeing now and the way that people are seeing the world, how much extra security is going to be required for our politicians, who we have pretty good access to at the moment as a country?
Yeah. It's already started, the increased security. So we have three prime ministers as such, only one at a time. So they only get the full
Mhm.
security. But even members of parliament are now having a secretary, a facilitator. They're all accompanied by somebody. So anyone that has a portfolio now is accompanied by somebody. Now, I know that they're there to record stuff and but they're also there as being there. So this
Mhm.
has started now already. We are going to lose. I know we're going to lose eventually that ability to walk up to the prime minister at the airport and say, "Hey, Prime Minister," shake their hand. "I've just got something to say to you." That will, I suspect, in time will disappear unless we make a change, unless we are able to start pulling back on some of the things, some of the behaviour that's happening at the moment. Yes, so we may well lose. I mean, uh, I was in charge of the group in Auckland that looked after Prime Minister Helen Clark.
Mhm.
Now, so I went to the FBI to do a crisis on the lead. I was a lead crisis negotiator. I did the FBI negotiators course, and I was over there talking with some people, and so it's run by the Secret Service in America, and they couldn't believe. And so I just brought up a photo of the Prime Minister's house. I said, "Well, this is the house, and we have the house next door, so the police are in there, right? That's how
Mhm.
it worked." And I can say that because that's not what they do anymore. So they were looking at it going, "Where's the gates? Where's the?" "Oh no, we don't have any of that. You can walk up and knock on the
Mhm.
door." It's just people couldn't believe that. And now, isn't that a great thing to have?
Yeah.
I've never been more proud. I'm always proud to be a Kiwi, but never more proud of saying, "Well, everyone has access to our prime minister. No one gets access to the president."
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, I'm very proud of our society, and I think we need to protect that at all
Mm.
costs. And
Um,
the legislation that's coming through from government at the moment, a lot of it is around that.
mm.
So looking at the gang patches, yeah, absolutely. Will it work? Ultimately, time will tell. It hasn't worked overseas. Maybe we'll be the first.
Um, Somebody did ask me as well, and a follow up on that question around egos. Is there any ego that comes into play from a prime minister going, "Well, I'm so important, I need to have a bigger security detail," or is it
Yeah,
worked out a different way?
there's actually a term for it. It's called a presidential personality, if you look it up. So it's an actual term in psychology called, and that is, I know you don't, right? And you will get sucked into that, right? So there's a chance of, when you're involved in politics or anything that you're in command of, even if as CEO of an organization, perhaps, if you become ingrained into it and it becomes part of you, and there's a risk then. Well, let's go back. New Zealand rugby might have been part of that for a while, where all men were on the board. I played rugby from the time I was 5, and I represented the country. I became the coach. I'm now the, well, that there's a risk there of you thinking, I only know and I'm the best at this. And that's where the ego comes in. It's not so much ego, but it's also a part of being self brainwashed. You become narcissistic. Everything I do is right and everybody else is wrong. So, and presidential is part of that. I will dig my heel, my toes, everything in because I'm right. And we see that ego is just the ego is an add-on to who we're talking about. We don't need to mention the name, but that's just, yeah. He's got narcissism like you would not believe.
The,
Well, you see it, don't you?
the brief comment I would add to that about this Secret Service debate is I don't want to see our country become too Americanized, and I'll give you one example. So I have a friend of mine that was having lunch in Wellington not too long ago, and him, the Prime Minister, and his wife were having a what they would call a romantic meal, but yet their equivalent to Secret Service was on the table across from them. I
Yeah.
don't want to get to a point where we get that. For me, it just
No.
because then you're going to start to have issues with the Privacy Act, because I don't want to get to, and it doesn't matter again if it's left or right Prime Minister. I don't want to see a point where, you can't even go out from there with your wife because your Secret Service has to follow you around. So how do you feel about it from that point of view? And then we will move on.
Well, I don't want to see it get to that point, but it's there now, and it always has been. So Blake, with our Prime Minister, went out with his wife. At the door would be the security team, and there'd be one outside in a vehicle. So there'd be 2 inside and 1 out. So you just don't see them, but they're there. So yes, it's happening, and it has to be, because it's in legislation. The law is there must always be, and if it's a public event, the law is there must be uniform police officers present. So we have to follow that legislation, and it's there for a reason. It's there for protection. But I get your point that well, when I was lucky enough to be with APEC, and I was the vehicles with APEC, but I got to see all of the countries coming in. Now, the President of the United States, their advanced team, so we send an advanced team. If our Prime Minister is going into whichever country, about 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks ahead of time, one person, maybe 2, will go over, and that are an advanced party. They look at the security so that when the team comes in, they're good to go. The American president, it's 6 months in advance. That's why there's never a drop in. So 6 months ahead of APEC, a whole contingent came into New Zealand, into Auckland, to look at security and to start. And then when before the president arrived, a plane, a very large plane, landed at Whenuapai Air Base and opened up, and a whole lot of helicopters and things came out, and big, huge limousines, and so I would hate to get to that stage. I really would. It's our Prime Minister has the ability to drive their own car to the shops and back. Now, that's, to me, is a great country to live in.
Oh, hey, just a little bit of a content warning here. The next section that we're talking about does get a little bit dark, and there are some really graphic things that come up. Not a lot, but there are some that might make a few people who are squeamish a bit, and we are aware that there might be young people watching this. So please be aware of that before you go into the next section, because we do discuss some things that might be a little off-putting for some people. Anyway, let's jump back to the episode. Yeah, what are your thoughts on what's happened over in LA? Gene Hackman and his wife and dog being found.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I've like everybody else, and sitting back thinking, first up, murder suicide,
Mm-hmm.
then thinking I can only go on what's in the media. But
Mm-hmm.
then I heard yesterday that the day after, apparently, when the timing was right, the children were out there laughing and had suddenly become millionaires. So the answer lies in the forensics. It always does, right? So, as a detective inspector, lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending which way you look at it, to have been involved in homicide investigations, it is always in the evidence. It's never as plain as it seems, and you really do have to go through it. Now, this case would be a good one because usually within America, there is absolutely so many homicides that they only get a chance to do things a certain way. But this one will be done absolutely to the letter. So that's the way it starts is with forensic examinations. Photographs go first, then the experts come in and they do the fingerprints, the DNA swabs, that do all sorts of things, and they take their time meticulous because everything is examined. I can tell you that. Swabs around sinks in case a person washed their hands. But this is interesting. This seems to be they've been deceased for
Mm.
at least a week,
Couple of
right?
weeks. Yeah, a couple of
At
weeks by the
least,
sounds of
or maybe even 2 weeks. So that's an interesting one. Forensic pathology. That's really interesting. They are
it.
good at this stuff. And I only learned this recently. I guess part of your trigger warning that um, flies lay maggots, and they can tell by if there's maggots how the age of the maggots when because flies come has to be 2 or 3 days after, and it's really detailed the analysis they do, and that then guides the investigators. So you start at the center and work out. So you start with the deceased, then you look at family members. Everyone is a suspect. Don't think anything else. Cops are cynical for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at friends, and then you look at the neighbourhood, and then you slowly expand your way out. I don't think they've got as far to go as that. I think it's fairly close within a small group of people, and you kind of know where I'm going with that, don't you? Yeah. It doesn't look like it's a murder suicide from the evidence. I would have said that straight away. Um, at 91, 92, something like that. Could it have been um, uh, what do we call it, euthanasia, something like that? No, because that would have come out straight away. There's something nefarious going on there for sure, without a doubt.
So what then are they? So what then are the sheriffs looking for as soon as they get that call? Because we saw that the his house team, now former house team, making that call that TMZ provided to the media. What kind of thing will they be putting into action as soon as they get that call? What will be going bam, 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 bang, all in a
Yeah,
row?
so they'll be looking at. So you always start with the deceased first, and you focus on them and what were they doing, who was around them, who are their family, who are their friends. So it's like the putting a stone into a pond. The circles go out, so you keep the circles tight initially, and you work within that small group. Don't think too wide, because otherwise you'll be overwhelmed. And don't be false leads. Always remember that they will come, or if it looks false, it is. So that gets put to one side. That has to be dealt with later. So you deal with the deceased, their family, their friends, the neighbours. Some of these things happen simultaneously, but that's how it works. So it all goes out from there. CCTV, right? So they'll be scrolling through that, trawling through that. Who was there in LA? Like most, even here in New Zealand, we have cameras on the motorways. We have cameras, so can we see cars coming? and it's really is hard work, but meticulous, and it has to be. But the way it sort of, it's like always there. Some say it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So you get a piece here, you get a piece there, you get a piece there, and slowly you start bringing the jigsaw together, and that's where it comes. I've been lucky with the ones that I've done. We've had a pretty clear line pretty quickly, but the thing with that is you then have to slow the machine down because everybody just wants to go for we got them. Just slow it down a bit. There's no immediate risk to anyone. So that's the other thing, is it becomes such a big machine. And believe it or not, it runs on its own steam and its own power, because you have teams of people, 5 or 6 teams. There's the victim team, there's the area team, there's the forensics, there's the evidential team, and they're all little teams doing their own thing. And if one goes off in a direction, that's why you bring them back at the end of every day and say, what have you found? What have you found? What have you found? And often, there's a lead there, but you've got to be right. Well, let's just bring it back. Anyone else can anyone else of the team lend its weight to that part before you go off down that track?
One more from me, and then I'll hand that to Paul to finish up. So now we know that they've been dead for quite some time. That was reported over in the US. Now, because they've been dead for so long, and there's rumors of discoloration and all that kind of stuff, does that make the toxicology harder?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
If so, how?
So bodies that are decaying produce alcohol, is the one I always remember, because when I worked for the coroner, I used to read out evidence in a coroner's court, and some religions would read out, that toxicology report showed point, it's nothing of alcohol. And it wasn't until somebody contested it and said, well, we don't drink, it's against our religion. Oh, no, that's naturally produced. So they've got rid of that now, thank goodness. So, it has to be alcohol. So, yeah, it does. And the decomposition makes it very, very difficult for toxicology, for analysis of organs, of the brain. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of it. It just makes it a bit more difficult. But remember, these people, that's what they do for a job. Even the technicians, they call them technicians, the people who do the actual cutting. They they can tell. They know straight away. They look and they go, oh, you see them go, yeah, that's where they're going, right? So that there'll be pretty clear evidence coming out of the postmortems as to the cause of death, I would suggest, but it does make it more difficult. In saying that, they're experienced and able to tell.
Okay. How much does the media have to do with this? Because obviously the information that comes out is controlled, usually, but you'll always have media as well that are like, well, let's see what else we can find out. Let's go talk to those neighbours. Let's go talk to the people down the street.
They're a curse and a friend, right? You need the media. You need them to get the information out there, to get evidence, to get information coming in. But they're also good investigators, right? And so never dismiss what they say. Now, in America, I particularly know this because when an incident happens, so for example, a crisis negotiating team, when we set up a headquarters where we're going to work from in America, they set up the TV and they monitor 3 or 4 different channels, because they can get a heck of a lot more information, the media, than what police might get, because they're out there canvassing. And in America, I want to get on TV to show the world what I know about this. And so oftentimes, particularly in America, they will turn up things and they will have footage. They get choppers in the air. They do all sorts of things. So they use the media very, very well over there. In fact, they used the media in an unusual way for the Washington sniper. They were sending messages to the sniper subliminally through the media.
Oh,
It
wow.
was fascinating the way so that was one of the case studies I had when I was in that the FBI Academy. It was just fascinating how they were dropping notes and how they were these subliminal messages, and people will go. And I remember one, I saw it from here. The sheriff said something, and I was like, what the heck was that? And then I found out what he was actually saying. We hear you, we see you. In other words, we've got your message.
Mm. Oh my
It's
God,
just,
that's
yeah.
creepy.
So they use their media really informatively.
Mm.
They do it very well. Whereas here, the police haven't had such a good run. Are better now these days, but the day when I was there was media that would not everyone, but just one or two, and that's all it takes is one, right,
Mm-hmm.
to plant the seed of one bad apple, and that person was merging other people's statements and make it sound like it was yours. They were just fabricating, using, well, if this happened, as though it actually did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you read it was these were the facts, and because of that, that person got cut off in the media. So we're a bit more wary of that, and as Americans, but they use it to their advantage. Yeah, look in the tactical teams where we'd call it the armed defender squad here, or
Mm-hmm.
they have their media cameras showing so that they can see around the house. They don't even have to get their own gear. They just go, oh look, let's just look at the news. Oh yeah, the helicopter from the media is above the house. Oh good, we can get a good look. I want you to go.
Mm.
Yeah,
That's
so they do
impressive.
it very well. Yeah.
Oh my God. We've been going for almost an hour, so we should probably wrap this up. But thank you so much for being here today. It has been really appreciated. I've learned so much. I love the
Yeah, pleasure.
interview.
It's been great with you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Blake. I appreciate this. We finally got there, mate. It took a back and forward and a few things on social media and that, but we made it
Yeah.
unexpectedly right now.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, and to the viewers, we'll see you on the next one.